Indian Ocean were then shipped to the slums of Mauritius. Over 20 years, they fought all the way to the High Court. They got a High Court judgment in their favour in 2000, in which the judge invoked the Magna Carta and saying that you just can't throw British citizens out of Britain, basically. He didn't put it that way, but that's what he was in effect saying. And again, this year, on May the 11th, two judges described the actions of British governments as outrageous, repugnant, and illegal. So it is unequivocal. It's wrong, and under the statutes of the International Criminal Court, it's a major crime. You can't do that. Now, what the Blair government has done to try and undercut the High Court is invoke the royal prerogative, something called Order in Council, where the Privy Councillors stand around the Queen and they read out apparently innocuous requests from the government, such as new school inspectors for Scotland or something like that. But they tucked away was the permanent expulsion of the Chagos Islanders. Well, now the judges have turned that over. It's hard to think that the government can go on getting away with this, but we mustn't hold our breath, and the islanders are certainly not going to give up. They're not home yet.
No, you've described the islanders as being considered expendable, and it's that theory of expendability that's run through a lot of your work, going back to Eritrea during the famine of the 70s and the aftermath of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. When you wrote about the starvation in Cambodia and made the documentary Year Zero, did you have any idea of the lengths to which British and American politicians would go to discredit the new Vietnamese administration in Cambodia, as well as effectively supporting the Khmer Rouge? I mean, that was again about propaganda and disinformation.
Yes, I did have an idea then. Most of my learning has been done on the road, and I learned fairly early on. And I think probably reporting from the United States and reporting from Vietnam was a crucial part of my political education. Certainly an understanding, as the great journalist I.F. Stone said, that all governments lie and nothing they say should ever be believed. And I think that's truism, actually, although my favourite quotation, which is from the great muckraker Claude Cockburn, who I think goes closer to the point: never believe anything until it's officially denied. And that is something I learned pretty early on. And so I have, which I believe should be part of the job of being a journalist, a very healthy skepticism of almost everything that we're told by governments or by officials or by vested interests. And in my experience, the evidence provided by ordinary people, if we call all of us ordinary people, but certainly in extraordinary circumstances, it has been reliable, and the evidence provided by governments has almost always unreliable. And I think, in answer to your question about expendability, because the media is an extension of the established order. I mean, we have a romantic view of it that, as Burke described it, as a fourth estate, and we're there to check all the other parts of government. That's all very nice, like US Constitution, which George Bush has just ripped up and thrown away. That sanctity of the fourth estate has always been a rather romantic one. In my experience, most mainstream media regard most other peoples in the world in terms of their usefulness. So we end up with worthy victims and unworthy victims. worthy victims Israelis, unworthy victims Palestinians, worthy victims Iraqi Kurds, unworthy victims Turkish Kurds. And so it goes on. We end up with good tyrants and bad tyrants. Good tyrant, General Suharto, one of the great mass murderers of the 20th century, and bad tyrant Saddam Hussein, compared with Suharto's small beer. And that's really how governments think. So the media really echoes that, amplifies it.
Yeah, you mentioned the Palestinian-Israeli conflict there, which you've covered for 40 years. In the book, you note that 9% of young British television news viewers didn't know that the Israelis were the occupying force in the so-called occupied territories and that the illegal settlers were Jewish. Many believed them to be Palestinians. How do you explain that misconception?
Well, I think we really need broadcasters to explain it, because they were talking about broadcast.